So then my niece had an anxiety attack, right? So she lives with my mom and my sister, and I got a call and they said like she can't breathe. We don't know what's going on. I head over there and I call my friend who's a pediatrician, and he said, "Yeah, that sounds like a classic anxiety attack, but it also sounds like it's over now. Like she's resting, just let her rest. And if it happens again, let me know." So it did happen again. And this time my mom calls me frantic saying that you need to take her to the hospital because she passed out and she hit the table and we think she may have broken her leg. She can't walk.
Wow.
So yeah, so I go over there, call my pediatrician friend again. He said, "Yeah, this sounds again like an anxiety attack, classic symptoms. Take her to this hospital." He directed me. I went there. 8 hours of testing, blood work, X-rays, all this stuff. Canadian healthcare system is free, but it takes a long time, right? So we spent the whole day there, and at the end, what we were told was, "We don't see anything, but if it happens again, let us know." And I remember this is the same thing my pediatrician friend said, and I knew what that really meant. What it really meant was if it happens again, she's getting diagnosed with an anxiety condition, and we're going to tell you what pill she has to take. And I thought, I cannot let it go to this. I have to figure out what's really going on. Meanwhile, I went to work and I didn't do anything about it. Just like I don't claim to be a superhuman. I forgot. I didn't do
Yeah.
anything. So my mom calls me again, and this time she says, in bawling with tears, "Your niece has run away from home." And to me, did not make any, completely out of character.
Yeah.
The sweet innocent girl doesn't leave the home by herself by her own choice, right? And meanwhile she's run away from home, like doesn't add up. So I go there and she's literally standing down the street, just standing there not knowing what to do, and I pick her up, take her in the car, and say, "What is it, bullying? Is it your school? Is it like social media? What's happening?" All the usual suspects. And what I realized is she didn't know. She had no clue why she felt the way she felt. There was no driver, there was no trigger. She was just escaping that space. She was trying to get away from the feeling, and she didn't know what else to do other than leave.
True.
And so I then, at that point, stopped the car, told my office, "Email me her genetic report right now." And we're in the car, and I wasn't looking for anxiety. What I was looking for is, what jobs does her body not do well? And how do I use that to interpret the way she's feeling? What did I see? First thing, big red flag, is her hormone cascade. So in the circadian rhythm of female hormones, the beginning of the cycle is when you have the least amount of hormones. You just finished getting rid of everything.
Yeah.
So there's almost nothing there. So her delta is much deeper. She goes into a really deep decline because of the way her genes instruct the metabolizing of hormones. She doesn't make them enough. So much deeper value. So it's already leading to mood issues, changes. And so I called my mother and said, "Do you remember like where she was in her cycle?" And I looked at the text messages and calls, and like clockwork, they were about every month apart. She was calling me 28 days, right?
Mm.
I was like, "This is tied to her cycle." And it was right at the beginning. And she told me right at the beginning, "You're right." She was coincidence that it was right before her cycle started, right during that dip with no hormones. But this is 3 months in a row, but she had been in her cycle for over a year. So why now? This happened during peak COVID 2 years ago in Toronto, where we had the world's longest lockdown in the middle of the winter, and she hadn't been outside in 5 months.
Wow.
Yeah, this was Toronto reality during lockdown. She literally didn't go out for 5 months in the winter where there's already not enough sun, which meant she got zero vitamin D. Now, you mentioned there's 22,000 genes in the genome. 2,000 of them require adequate vitamin D to function properly, to express properly, to do their jobs. She was getting zero. So I looked at the genetics of her vitamin D, and there's 3 steps. Get D2 from the sun, convert it to D3. She has the worst possible gene for that.
Mm.
Transport that D3 to the cell. There's another gene, worst possible gene for that. Bind it and connect to the cell. She had the worst possible gene for that. So she was designed of an ancestry that was just out in the sun all day long, that needed to mitigate the overexposure to sunlight. And meanwhile, she
Exactly.
hadn't been outside in 5 months, right? So why did this equal an anxiety problem? So hormones failing, this key micronutrient that drives so many biological processes also failing. So she's already teetering on the edge. Then we look at her mood and behavior. Then I started looking at the anxiety genes, and I looked at her ability to deal with dopamine. Dopamine is that chemical that allows you to feel pleasure and reward and satisfaction. And the way you experience it is you deploy it, and your brain binds it. There's these receptors in your brain. DRD2 is a gene that determines how dense those receptors are. She has the least possible density. So it's very hard for her to experience pleasure. It's kind of like I can't get no satisfaction all the time, right?
Hmm.
Then you have to clear the dopamine to get back to normal. She has the fastest possible clearance. It's COMT is the protein that it's called, right? Fast possible COMT. So hormones are horrible, zero vitamin D, so that's already pushing her over the edge. And she has this inability to experience pleasure and reward in a context where she hadn't been outside in 5 months and is like her whole life is just homework on the computer during COVID lockdown. That all equaled what looked like an anxiety crash. And it truly was. But she didn't have a mental health issue. She didn't have a chemical imbalance issue. She didn't have a propensity towards anxiety that needed medication, right?
Yeah.
What she had was a low exposure to sunlight. And so I gave her two things, L-theanine to boost the dopamine and make her feel happy, and a high dose vitamin D regimen. But I split the vitamin D because remember, she doesn't transport and bind it. So I didn't give it to her all at once. I gave her 3 doses during the day. The very next month, her next cycle, it didn't happen. And it has never happened since then once again.